talk to you about today is competencies and how you express what you learned and the skills that you've developed in the workplace and how we assess that as part of this application process. So I'm going to spend about 20 minutes introducing you to how to write about your competencies in the application process. And the whole point about this is, this whole engineering doctorate program is about trying to recognize and value the skills that you've developed in the workplace. So as Gabby was saying before, it's really, we want to find a way to understand the expertise and the skills and experience that you bring to the PhD program beyond a simple looking at what your degree was. Yeah, so the competencies are therefore an important part of our application process. And just to remind you, Gabby had this earlier, so what we're looking for is a description of up to 5 of your work-based competencies illustrated through workplace projects and work that you've done. And the total amount of space that you have for this is 300 to 700 words. So this would be, for example, 500 words to describe 5 different competencies, 5 different projects you worked on, what you did in those projects. So it's actually quite short. And so what we're looking for is a really snappy and succinct way for you to explain your competencies. Now, this is a new application process for this kind of degree, a new application for a doctorate program. Most applications to doctorate programs look at your academic history and your degrees and so on. And so why do we come to these competencies? Well, actually, the way that we've describing these competencies and our requirements is informed by some of the requirements for professional certifications, such as Chartered Engineer and other certifications you can get in the professional world. And so we based it on that to try and really capture the essence of what you're doing at work. So the key competencies we're looking for are these ones, and I'm going to go through each of those and then give you some examples of how these might be described. So we're interested in your problem-solving skills, innovation, critical analysis, adaptability, responsibility, and communication. So they're just the things you voted for. And we're going to go through some examples of those later, but let me just talk a little bit about what we're looking for there. We're going to share these slides later, so you don't need to worry about writing everything down. So problem solving in this competencies model is the use of theoretical knowledge to solve problems in new technologies. So maybe in the workplace, using some theory that you found on the web or something that's used in your business to solve problems in technology or engineering. Innovation is the use of knowledge to develop maybe new analytic techniques, application knowledge to deliver innovative products and services, the development of solutions to engineering problems using new or existing technologies. And what you'll notice in both of these, and you'll notice this quite a few times, is that a lot of it is about using knowledge and applying it in your work. So it's not just saying, oh, I invented something or I came up with something. It's saying, oh, I used this theory or I used this best practice that we use in our company and I applied it to this situation. So critical analysis is the use of, again, theoretical knowledge to analyze, interpret, and explain complex situations. And so I'm going to give you an example of that later. Adaptability is applying knowledge across different activities and situations. So again, you'll see it's a lot about applying knowledge and using knowledge and interpreting knowledge in different ways. Responsibility is, for example, taking responsibility for complex engineering systems, especially ones that have some risk or some sort of large amount of management requirement to it. So we want to see there that you can handle a situation where you have to balance different demands on your time and so on. And then finally, communication is about, it's not just communicating person to person, but being able to communicate through written documentation. So it might be technical reports within the company, or maybe it's white papers that your company publishes more publicly, or maybe it's communicating with different user groups or stakeholders. So maybe you have to communicate with managers and the CTO, or maybe you have to communicate with customers. We're interested in how you do that in your work. Okay, so that's a brief rundown of the examples. How are the competencies? How are you actually going to explain these to people in these 150 words or so that you have? So we've got these 6 competencies. And what we're suggesting is that you use an approach called STAR, which is you think about the situation, the task, the activity, and the result for each of these examples. What do we mean by situation in this case? Let me just get rid of this notification that's popped up. So the situation would be about setting the context for your story. So it's maybe thinking, oh, where were you working in the team? Were you leading the team? Were you in a big company? Were you in a startup? What was the setting? What was the task? So what was required of you? What were you asked to do in that situation? What did you realize that you needed to do? So what was the thing that you realized needed doing? The activity, so there you explain what you actually did concretely. So what was your contribution? What did you do to solve that task? And then the result, which is what actually happened. What was the result of this activity? It could be a good or a bad outcome. It could be, oh, we tried to innovate this thing, but it actually didn't work. And then reflect on why it didn't work. That's what we'd be interested in. So you really need to be reflecting here on the result in terms of the impact of your contribution. So I'm going to go through a few examples of how you would use this STAR framework, situation, task, activity, and result, to explain your competencies. Now, there are a lot of competencies and I only have 20 minutes. So actually, we're going to go through the two competencies that you voted as your most comfortable with and the two that you're least comfortable with, and go through those in detail. Okay, so I'm going to use an example of myself and I'll tell you a bit about why I'm doing it this way. So back in the early 2000s, I worked as a usability engineer in companies, and I was part of the dot-com boom and later dot-com bust. So I was working at companies such as Capgemini, Ernst & Young, worked at small web agencies. That was fun. Even set up my own company. And I was doing things from doing information architecture, so structuring websites and structuring interactive TV experiences, doing lo-fi prototyping, iterative design. We also did a lot of work on functional specifications, working with programmers, dialogue with programmers and graphic designers and so on. So I'm going to go through some examples based on my experience here all those years ago, just to explain how you might convey your competencies in this application process. So remember, there's we asked you for up to five competencies, and we're going to go through four now, and the four are going to be the ones that are voted most and least in that poll. And I'm going to talk about how we can use the STAR for that. So the first one, so problem solving was voted as one of the ones you were least sure of. So here's an example. I'm going to read a little bit, but you can also read the text later as well. So back in the early 2000s, I was information architect for a new web portal for a local government. So the local government came and said, oh, can you make us a web portal that will connect together all the services that are offered in this local government? So it was everything from paying parking permits, council tax, finding out about local council meetings, and so on. And the interesting thing at that time in the early 2000s was there was no examples of best practice in this area. So if we think about the STAR, the situation was, I was in a team, I was responsible for the information architecture. That was the situation that we were doing, involved in. And the problem was that there was no best practice for how to design this website. So the task was, how do we create an information architecture for a website that's bringing together all these different sources of information, which could be quite confusing? How do we make that usable and easy to navigate? So that was the task that I had. And the activity we did was I used theories of cognitive load and visual perception, along with some HCI methods for lo-fi prototyping to get people engaged with the design, to develop this information architecture for the web portal. So that was the activity that I did. I used these theories. So remember, I said it's important to say what sort of background information I'm using. So I used HCI, human-computer interaction theories. I used a bit of psychology and some visual perception, along with some lo-fi prototyping, which was sort of best practice at the time. And this resulted in an iterative design and build of a new web portal, which was then successfully launched for this local government in 2002. So in this way, I'm showing what the result of it was. Okay, so let's look at this example here. So we've got problem solving. I've set the setting. So I said, I was responsible for the design. I could have given a little bit more about the nature of the company, maybe. I'll talk a little bit about the task here. So what was the problem? The problem was they wanted to bring together all their services into one place. How to do that? There was no best practice so far. What was the activity? What did I actually do to try and address that task? So in this case, I used theories that I knew before and did some iterative prototyping. And the result was both iterative design, but also build and actual implementation of a new web portal, which was successfully launched. I've said what the impact is here. So this is 149 words, right? So this is the sort of length that we're talking about for communicating one competency. I think in this example on the last part, the result, I think I could have talked a little bit more about the impact of what this had done. So I could have said, oh, and then it was used by, I don't know, how many thousand people a week or something like that. So it would have been good to talk a little bit more about the impact. But in general, this description here illustrates problem-solving competency through the STAR model. Okay, so that's that one. Second example, innovation. This was voted as one of the ones you are most concerned about. Yeah. So this was in 2002. I was working on an intranet for a major pharmaceutical company. And this was an interesting situation because, again, it was a company that wanted to build an internal web services across its European headquarters, right? European businesses. And they didn't have such a thing before. And the problem was that I thought it'd be great to go around every major European capital and do lo-fi design workshops and all this kind of thing. But they didn't want us to do that. So we had to find a way to bring all the different parts of the company together to do this design. And there was no practical way to do that at the time. So what we did, so the situation I'm saying there is, I worked with a team of designers and programmers, the development of an intranet, that's the situation. The task that we had was how can we do this design in a way that's going to include lots of people from different countries together. So what did I do? I worked with the design director to develop a new prototyping process, which built on existing approaches, but it was an innovation in the method. So the point is here that I took something that we'd done before in a different setting, was a conventional way of doing it, and applied it in a different way, and developed a new analytic technique to be able to understand everybody's different opinions on the design and how they would create this new system. So that was the activity. And then the result is that using this new analytic technique that we designed, we created a global design language for the intranet, which was successfully deployed through the design and build of the intranet across multiple European sectors. So in this example of innovation, I got the setting. So I was working with designers and programmers. The task was to try and find a way to do brainstorming and development across multiple locations. The activity was to build a new analytic technique. Well, that's the innovation, really. And then the result was that we actually came up with this global design language that worked across many, many different European countries. And then we actually deployed it and built the website and the internet for the company. Okay, so that's 142 words. And I think this kind of nicely sets out all the different parts of that problem that we worked on. Okay, so we've got about 5 minutes left. I will go on to the last two examples. So critical analysis, I think, was the next one that was voted for. So critical analysis. So I talk about a setting here. So I was a usability engineer, and the setting was that I had to analyze and explain results of user studies to a variety of audiences, right? So if you do a user study, you get like 100 people to test a website, and then you find that, oh, they couldn't find the buy button on Amazon or something like this. But the problem is you have to then convince managers, chief financial officers or whatever to redevelop the website, to put more money into it, to make it better and so on. How do you do that? So the setting is, I'm in a multidisciplinary company, I'm doing these studies, I have to convey it. And then the task is, how do I explain to people or convey the meaning of these user studies that we did? Okay, and then the activities for this was to try and, what I tried to do in terms of critical analysis, so this is, critical analysis is really about how do you use theoretical knowledge to analyze, interpret, and explain complex systems. I tried to use theories of consumer behavior and cognitive psychology to explain to like the managers or the chief financial officers why people were doing things they were doing on the website, why were they having difficulty finding the buy button, or why they couldn't find the mortgage that they wanted, this kind of thing. So in this way, I'm using this example to really talk about the way that I was trying to analyze the data. So I was getting all this data back from the user studies. How do I explain that to people? How do I analyze it in a way that they will be convinced by my results? And then, so for the final part, the result, the point was there that I had to convince the project managers and so on to put extra time into redesigning the websites. So in this example, you'll see I put the S here is I've explained the situation quite well, although there's quite a lot of text talking about the situation here. I talked about the task, which was that I had to explain or develop a way of explaining these user studies and what was good or bad about the current websites. But in terms of the activity and the results, I put a little question mark here because I think it doesn't explain concretely enough what it was that I did. And it also doesn't really convey what the impact was of what I did. What was the final result of doing this explanation, these extra critical analysis? So in this example, it's actually longer than the other two, you'll notice. So it's a little bit waffly, like I've just been waffling a little bit now as well. And I feel that maybe the first bit, the setting, could have been a bit shorter. It's a little bit vague, but definitely the activity. So what I actually did is kind of unclear in this example. And I think I should have talked more about, maybe I could have talked about the specific techniques that I'd used for the critical analysis. Maybe I could have mentioned some particular techniques, or I could have given a concrete example of how that technique would have turned a user study output into an obvious return on investment or something like that. And then the result here is really vague, right? It doesn't really say what impact this activity had. What did my critical analysis actually do in the end? It doesn't say, oh, the managers decided they would do another iteration of the design, or they'd put another, I don't know, £100,000 into redeveloping the website or something. It doesn't say anything like that. So this example, it starts off well, but I feel it doesn't really convey what the impact of my critical analysis was. And when you give your examples, we really want to know what is the impact of what you did in that project, right? So that is what is missing in this example. So try and make sure you convey what it is that you did and why that made an impact for your competencies. And then finally, adaptability. I think I have a couple of minutes left for that. So this example is one that people were quite confident about. And adaptability is really about being able to apply theoretical knowledge across different activities. So in this one, this was about in the early 2000s, we were developing interactive experiences that would work on the web, on websites, and also interactive TV, and also mobile user interfaces. And at that time, mobile phones had keypads and tiny text screens. There were no iPhones at the time. So it was quite difficult to design an experience that was consistent across a website and an early interactive TV and a phone that only had a keyboard, right? So in this, what we did in this one was we adapted some theories from traditional website, human-computer interaction, and we adapted those to be able to use them on mobile user interfaces and also interactive TV. So that was the setting. And the task here is a little bit vague because I don't really say, oh, we had to make it usable or efficient or something like that. So in this example, I think the task is a little bit vague. The activity was quite clear in this example. So saying, oh, I need to adapt the theories because at that time, most of the HCI theories assume that people would be using a keyboard and mouse, but on a phone, it's different, and it's obviously different on interactive TV. So the activity of what I did there, adapting the theories, is clear, but the task situation is not. And then the result, again, is a bit vague, right? So it says, oh, well, when working for an advertising agency, I use HCI theories across the web, interactive TV. But it doesn't actually say what the concrete impact of that was. So was the client happy with that, or did we get good user test results, or what happened after that? So in this final example, adaptability is really about taking a theory and then using it deploying it in different situations, right? And so I was saying, well, it's across different devices here, web, mobile, and TV. The task is a little bit vague here, but the activity where I'd applied those theories in different ways and why the theories needed adapting is clear. But the result in this example is, I feel, not clear, and it's a little bit vague. It's like, okay, well, I did that, but so what? I mean, what impact did that actually have on the business? Okay, so they are 4 example competencies. Problem solving and adaptability were the ones that you felt most confident with. So I hope I gave you some examples that would help you there. And then we also looked at innovation and critical analysis, which are the ones you felt least confident with. You'll get these slides, so you can have a look at these as well. Just to note, those ones where I put a question mark really means I don't think that really conveyed that part of the STAR system. So to recap, the key competencies that we're looking for are these ones: problem solving, innovation, critical analysis, adaptability, responsibility, and communication. You write up to 5 of these. Use this STAR process to structure your writing. That's really going to help you. And I hope that my examples helped you think about that. So think about the situation, set the context, talk about the task, what was required, the activity, what you actually did, and then the result. And tell us really what the impact was. And even if it was something that didn't work, just really explain or reflect on why that was.